All right, all right. Keith, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tea Time with LinkUp Chicago. My name is Keith Green. I am currently the interim executive director for the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus. And with us tonight, we have our esteemed co host, my uh, brothers, colleagues, brothers in the struggle, from left to right, the way that they appear on my screen. Brother Kylan Hooks, Brother Dale Roberson, and the notorious Brother Darren Calhoun. Thank you all for being with us. Thanks for joining us for this very important conversation.
Awesome, awesome. So thank you so much for just kind of welcoming us into the space. And for those who are joining, we are going to be on for just one quick hour, but we are going to get into a lot of really important topics tonight. I wanted to start off with just a little bit of a story and get into what we're talking about. So if we go back with the little memory lines, in February of this year, I've been talking to somebody on one of the apps, and we began to hang out, and we met and just had this amazing time together on Valentine's Day. And I was like, wow, like this space to this space to truly be present with each other, to be our whole selves, to be vulnerable with each other. I don't often have that. I do a lot of leadership, and sometimes it's easy for me to be in service mode. But to have somebody like take care of me, like he made me breakfast and all this really nice stuff, and it was just like, oh, this is awesome. And as I shared on a previous show, I have this background where me being in relationships and so forth has been treacherous territory because of my religious and spiritual abuse that I endured for a number of years. And so, as we're getting to know each other over the last few months, we would spend time together. I'd go over to his place and hang out. He lives right in my neighborhood. We're in East Garfield Park. And as we got to know each other and got to hang out with each other, we would share a bit more about our lives and our struggles. And one of the things that he shared was he came to Chicago as part, a couple years ago, as part of our process of recovery from meth use. And so, me being me, love people, meet them where they are. And we didn't, because we're still getting to know each other. We still hadn't talked a lot about where that was in the moment. But I did see him doing a lot of work. We talked about being in therapy and shared different things that going on, that our therapists were sharing with us. We talked about our dreams and our hopes. We have a mutual friend who does this work, and one of the things that I loved about what he said was like he's like, I want to be just like this person. I want to be a little version of this person who really showed up and helped him, and helped him get connected to all kinds of resources, even helped him get rental assistance and all these things that were really critical in his recovery journey. And as time went on, I was like, okay, like I'm not sure what to call this or what to say this is, but I'm going to take a risk and start introducing this wonderful guy into other parts of my life. And so, uh, right around Easter would have been that the following Friday. I don't have my dates together, but that following Friday would have been the first time we were going to go out to an Onyx event and learn a little bit more. Onyx was doing a demo about being a sub, and we're gonna learn a little bit more and just have a good time. And I was gonna introduce him to some of my friends. We went out on that Saturday before Easter, and one of the things, wow, I did not plan on saying this much, but I'm just gonna say it because I got to do my own process. One of the things that we talked about was that I've been dating somebody for about a year now, and we talked about me being poly, or me exploring this idea that love is abundant and that the love I have for others is something that doesn't diminish because I love more than one person. And while that was a new and kind of a different concept for him, as we talked, he just kind of curled up and laid in my lap. and said, I really feel safe with you. I really feel cared for with you. And to me, that was the best thing. Like we had so many things in common that we shared, and it was awesome. Um, and to just be getting to know somebody, right? To just be becoming vulnerable, to be sharing your whole self with them, to be ready to introduce them into the rest of your world. Um, that next day would be Easter, and as somebody who works in a church and somebody who does other kinds of production, Easter was going to be an all day affair for me. And I was like, I'm going to be busy all day, but you can text me and we'll talk whenever we can. And on Easter, we just had a quick conversation as I was running from one place to another. And he said that he had had kind of a rough morning, but he was feeling okay. And I was like, okay, well, take care of yourself. What I didn't realize is that would be the last conversation that we had. Um, that night, somewhere between that night and the next morning, he and some friends had been using meth, crystal meth, and from what one of his friends told me, they believed that the meth that they used, they didn't know that it had fentanyl in it, and uh, to not get into too many details, he had a very, very, very strong reaction to the fentanyl. And they thought he was going to be okay, so he was kind of at home for a while. But then when clearly wasn't doing well, they rushed him to a local hospital. At the hospital, they said, "Oh, you're just high. You're just faking it." And they delayed admitting him. And very shortly after he was admitted, he passed on from this life. I didn't find out about it until a couple days later, and it was the same day that that LinkUp Chicago and Crystal Clear Chicago were going to be screening a documentary about the impact of crystal meth on Black, gay, and bisexual men in Chicago. Um, and while I was still in shock and just kind of reeling from what the news that I had just learned that day, um, I had a moment to realize that uh, what happened to him was not at all uncommon in our city. Uh, the impact on him, his friends, the community he's a part of, all of that. Yeah, all of that is part of a much bigger story of what's happening in Chicago right now, and that is that fentanyl is in many substances. And as I learned very recently, it's not even intentionally in all the substances. It's just the kind of thing that when various substances are being produced, if fentanyl is being produced or used in the same place, it can just kind of end up in other things that it's not supposed to be in. And so what ends up happening is people end up thinking they're doing something that's not necessarily going to really take you out. And because there's fentanyl in it, it can completely overdose you and possibly end your life. And so, um, so my story in all of this is that as I shared my story, others that I was talking to were also sharing stories of people whose lives had been suddenly taken. And it was in part because of fentanyl. And so I wanted to, one, make space for myself to grieve and to mourn the loss that I had, but two, uh, extend and carry on this work of what do we do, right? Like we're sad, we're upset, we're mad, but what do we do? And so tonight, I wanted to give us some time to talk about meth, to talk about fentanyl, to talk about harm and harm reduction, for us to really look at what's happening in our city, what's happening in our community, and to share some resources and some ideas on what we can do about it. Yeah. So, um, so yeah, I need a minute to collect myself, but could anybody share more just about fentanyl and what that is and what's going on?
I think before we do that, Darren, I just want to say thank you for sharing and allowing yourself to be so vulnerable. I can't even imagine what the past several weeks have been like for you, and particularly since you've been involved in this work for some time, and then to have sort of this personal experience in this kind of way, and to learn about it on the day when, like, there's in many respects a high moment for the work because we're
Yeah,
exposing it to so many other people, and to have to sit through that. And I just want to acknowledge, and just make space to celebrate and to support and to love on you in this moment.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I also echo what Dr. Green said, and you know, grief is such a beast, right? And the way that we grieve is very individual, right? And there's no like wrong way of going about it. It's just our way, right? And how we can continue to move through the world despite it, right? You know, yes, there are the 5 stages of grief, but not everybody goes through each of those stages, and they may not even be in that order, which is typically listed, right? There's many different ways to experience grief, and the fact that you are able to be open and vulnerable and sharing this as part of your process, that is an aspect of healing.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll just to add to that, that that has been such an important part of this for me, like acknowledging that there's grief and the complexity, right? Because we don't normally talk about when somebody's passed away and it's drug involved or drug related. We don't talk about our queer relationships. We don't talk about a lot because we've been kind of cultured to play a certain amount of respectability. We don't talk bad about the dead. And what I'm critiquing in that is that we don't make space for us to process the traumas that we experience. We don't make space to process um, what we're going through because we're so busy like upholding a certain appearance or performing a certain ideal. And what I've really, and I'm so thankful for my therapist, I've really given myself space to feel all the feelings, to ride the waves. So I've had everything from really joyous, amazing, fun times, and I've had times where I'm just in bed crying, and all of it is okay. Like all of it is a part of the same, and I'm talking about like the same hour. Like it is not like, oh well, this day's a good day, that day's a day. Like I'm like, nope, I'm tear stained, but come on over. We just gonna hang out. We're gonna have a good time. And I think that's part of me being willing to like be open like this is that I've done too much of this in compartmentalization and isolation, and I don't think that helps any of us. I think it looks nice and it feels like, oh yeah, I'm being strong. I
Mm,
want to see us do things differently. Seriously.
mhm.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that, Darren. And just the vulnerability, as other folks have stated, that you've brought into this space and allowed us to share in, right? As you're talking about those things that historically we don't get to live in, and we don't get to live in them being okay. We don't get to live in
Yeah.
the non-judgment of those feelings, those experiences. And so I really appreciate you bringing that here and sharing it with all of us, as I think about one of those things that can keep us separate from one another. It's those walls of judgment, right? And the walls that I might perceive I'm being judged. But to have this space, I think, is a really beautiful and brave thing. So I just want to thank you again for allowing us in,
Yeah.
and really to share in this moment with you. Thank you.
Appreciate that.
You also raise you raise it from a personal individual perspective, right? This image or facade, and we've got to always kind of look like we got it together and that we're strong, and this, that, and the other. But I want to think about in terms of us as a community. right? This topic has been really, and the topic of sort of, you know, substance use and abuse has been one that's been challenging to really engage in, because there's I think because there's so much always coming at us, there's so much negativity
Mhm.
specifically coming at us, right? And we saw this happen with HIV when Black gay men, you know, now make up a significant portion of new infections and people living with HIV. Then there's that stigma associated with being Black and gay that has to do with high HIV infection rates, which we know is not the result of anything any individual is doing. It's a structural thing, right? And we're seeing the same kind of thing with this. It's like one more thing, one more negative thing that is kind of being thrown at or associated or connected to us with and about. And I think we've got to figure out how we break through that to really kind of engage our community in ways that are not preachy, but involve harm reduction approaches, strategies, techniques, etc. I just think we have to. That's kind of the elephant in the room, right? This is hard to address because there's so much negativity associated with us that this is just one more thing, right? That we've got to kind of deal with and tackle.
Mhm.
Yeah, the ways that yeah, the ways that we don't take time to think about harm, but instead like jump straight to the shame and
Mhm.
all of that. Like,
Mm.
yes, like some people might you might have a just say no error informed, formed idea about how do you respond to drug use. You might have the, maybe you grew up in the dare generation and you head off for so friendly. Oh, now I'm really telling my age. But whatever you had as a kid, people that you trusted told you this is how you deal with drugs. This is how you do it. You just say no, you just abstinence only. And then
Mhm.
as you grow up, you're like, well, where's the part where people start offering you the free drugs? Like, where's the part where where all the where the bad kids come and try to force you to
Mhm.
take a joint or something like that? And all of a sudden, next thing you know, you've turned into like this drugged out person. Where was that?
Mhm.
And in people's good intentions to address harm, they create these caricatures of what can happen or what will happen that make all of the risks seem unreasonable, or something that you're like, well, well, that didn't happen. I tried drugs once and I didn't turn into a drugged out cartoon. So maybe it's
Mhm.
not so bad. And instead of equipping people with the kind of knowledge and tools for them to figure out what is the path for me, what is the way, abstinence might be a way for many, and it may not be for others. But because we don't have these nuanced conversations, I think we're leaving everybody at risk, and we're harming people by not having these more detailed conversations.
Mhm.
That's exactly right, Darren. When I think about that, and I love the way that you phrase that, where was that conversation? The person showing up, offering me the free stuff, right? Where was that? When we think about how we engage, and if we're going to begin to have these nuanced conversations, we need to make space for all of that. We need to make
Right.
space for the folks who have decided abstinence only is what works for them, and the folks who decided, hey, these are the things I need to put in my body, when and where and how, right? But what we're talking about is opening up that space to be honest, to be transparent, and do that with each other,
Yeah.
right? Just like Keith shared, right? We're not in a vacuum. We are individuals, right? And we can make those individualized decisions. But what happens when we step outside of these doors is we're in community.
Right.
Mhm.
And how do we create this space? How do we hold the space for everyone to show up where they are,
Mhm.
right? Which is one of those basic tenets of harm reduction. If we want to talk a little bit about harm reduction, it's like, where am I right now? What is working for me?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Good.
how can I lessen, minimize the harmful impact that
Mhm.
I'm experiencing? Right.
Could
And there
you
are
could you
so
break
many
that
different
down for
ways
us
to
some
do
more?
that. Go ahead, Darren. I'm sorry.
No, I was saying, could you break that down for us some more? Like for some reason, it looks like your camera's frozen, but we're hearing you okay. Oh,
Okay,
and
terrific.
Well, it's interesting. It's moving and not moving, but as long as we're hearing you, I think that's the main
Mhm.
thing.
Word. Thank you so much, Darren. I apologize for that. It's probably my connection. Probably my connection.
That happens
Um,
too.
but when I think about that, right, is that like when we step outside these doors and we're in community with each other, we all are at different stages, different points in our lives, right? Different points in those coping mechanisms and strategies and techniques, those things that are working for us and those things that are not. And all of those things are valid. And if I'm truly thinking about taking care of my family, if I'm thinking about taking care of my community, if I'm taking care of my brothers, my sisters, my folks in between and outside of, then I'm truly thinking about honoring where they are and helping to lessen the harmful outcomes that folks might be experiencing. So it's not really about, we can talk about the substance, alcohol, meth, any others, right? And that's real. But those things and that type of behavior is serving some purpose, it's serving some role, it's serving some function,
Mhm.
right? How do we get to a place where we can share openly and honestly about how it's impacting us, whether that's the impact on self or the impact to relationship when we're in community with each other? Because that's where we're going to find, right, the support to reduce that harm. That's
Hmm.
where we find it.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in for a moment, Kylan, to add on to that, substance use often starts as a coping mechanism, right? And for some people, even still today, that is a way that has been an answer for them in many ways, right? Um, and going back to what Darren said about growing up with like Just Say No and Dare, I mean, we go back to the war on drugs, right? When what that really was the war on Black people and people of color. Like let's be real here. Even going back even further than that, I think it was like the 1920s or 1930s. There's that movie Reefer Madness, which it's been a while since I've seen it, but that movie is wild, wild in its depiction of what it thinks that reefer or marijuana does to the human body. It
I'm gonna
is
see if I can find that on YouTube and drop it in the chat.
it is cuckoo bananas and wildly inaccurate, but it's all scare tactics, right?
Right.
Um, and and when we think about our community, and I like to sometimes use the phrase historically excluded, right? Because we
Mhm.
are we are historically excluded, and just how the different generational stigmas and how the generational like redlining and blocking of successes for our community, um, that all plays a part in how we cope with our realities, whatever that looks like, right? So um, not saying that, you know, let's say white people don't have their issues, but it's different, right? It's different, right? Because the access is different. The access is very different, right? And I certainly don't want to minimize their troubles, right? But um, we don't really need to belabor just what people of color and especially Black people in America have gone through and continue to go through, right? So we have our community has faced a particularly unique way of structural racism that's different from other people, right? And and that can't be minimized when we talk about the need for us to be able to have safe spaces that for us to be able to increase services to increase access, right? And because there's a resource desert in a lot of different parts of like the south and west side, right? um, and that's going to, I mean, granted, we can't just snap our fingers and have that happen. That is a top down, like that is a macro level issue that needs to trickle down. you know Me being a therapist, I'm very much on the ground, right? Doing the person to person. And I feel that's great. But where folks like Dr. Green come in, he's working on a policy level that trickles down, and that is so important as well, right? So that's why it's important that we're all working at this from different angles. And And I just wanted to add that.
Yeah. That piece about the racial intersection of this, I think, is so critical. I think I think it's, and maybe Keith can talk about this a little bit too, but the fact that the fact that this I keep sharing with people that that meth use is typically seen as a white, um, suburban, or rural issue. And when I share about how prevalent it is in Black gay communities in Chicago, people are astounded. And it's like, wait, what's going on, and why is no one talking about this? Is usually the next statement after that. But Keith, could you maybe share with us a little bit about what we're seeing research wise on this?
Yeah, I mean, you're hitting it. Well, so one of the things that is problematic is that we don't really have good data still. So a part of the effort on the policy front is to figure out how we particularly get our government agencies to collect good data. That's problematic in a number of ways as well, because it turns into surveillance and then potentially criminalization, and we have to sort of be mindful about the way that plays out. But if we're not at those tables, initiating those conversations, involved in those conversations, then policies get put into place that lead to outcomes that we absolutely don't want, right? So that's a thing for sure. But we don't have really good data. Much of what we know is, you know, anecdotal and from community reports of what's happening. We certainly saw significant increases, and this comes by way of our community-based organizations. We saw significant increases during COVID lockdowns, right, where people were isolated and struggling. I think that's the other piece of it. Dale mentioned the coping aspect of this, but people typically turn to substances for as a means of coping.
Hmm.
And we've been, these past few years have been really trying for all of us, and there's been more of the turning to drugs to cope, and one of those drugs just so happens to be meth. But there's a lot that folks. There are a number of reasons why folks use meth. Um, I think we generally tend to think of the sexual reasons, right? It helps to remove inhibitions. Folks can feel freer to do whatever it is that they may want to do sexually, that they may not feel free to do because of societal norms and
Hmm.
expectations, right? We don't really talk a lot about that, but why would somebody need to feel free to do whatever they want to do? Well, because society has put so much stigma, shame, etc., on us about our bodies and the way that we engage with our bodies. So
Hmm.
meth becomes a way to engage differently. And so we really need to be there's so many. Dale hit it on the nail. We need to be attacking this and approaching this from so many different angles. But certainly the harm reduction, keeping harm reduction first, right? Which also means like we're protecting people from criminalization and all of
Right.
those kinds of things, while at the same time trying to protect our communities, right? Because we
Right.
know that if people are turning to drugs to cope, the expectation generally is not to die. And
Right.
so, if you're looking to feel good, to escape, whatever the case may be, with a particular drug that will have a particular effect, or you assume will have a particular effect, when it is laced with something else, whether intentionally or not intentionally, there's a whole other thing and a whole other level of harm reduction that we have to start having a conversation around and about. And we have to think about how we address this, this laced already illegal drug supply, right? It just becomes so layered and so complicated to address.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I think again, like, naming these tensions, naming these dynamics is so important, because in what's being missed is that we will see politicians especially, as they run up to election happens. We'll see them get hard on drugs, hard on crime. We're gonna lock them up. We're gonna clean up the streets, and it sounds real good in a tweet or a headline. But what that really means is that people who are in trauma, people who are unable to access health care and unable to access traditional or orthodox means of medication, that these people are being put into a system that we know is overtly harmful. They're being put into a system that we know you're worse coming out of our correction system than when you went in. It's
Mm,
it's just factually true by their own data.
That's right.
And so instead of us having something that actually makes our streets safer, we get behind and we fund ever increasing the police budget, ever increasing the amount of money that's going to the prison industrial system,
mm,
instead of doing things like making sure people's traumas are treated when they're hurting, making sure that people have access to rehabilitation programs rather than incarceration programs,
mhm,
making sure that that people, for example, and this is me speaking for myself. People have different opinions about this, but if the only way that you can access a homeless shelter is to already be clean or already be sober from drugs, how in the world? How
mhm,
you're striving and surviving in the streets in horrible conditions in a city in a world that does not care about your existence, and yet you're supposed to also pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be sober and clean for whatever number of days,
mhm,
so that you can get this basic thing like housing or basic things
mhm,
like food. That is inhumane to me,
mhm,
and that is, I think, part of why we stay with this nonprofit industrial complex, right? Where we
mhm,
stay with this thing where, oh, we're trying to help people, but we're helping those who are willing to help themselves. It sounds good
mhm,
on paper, but it maintains this cycle of, as soon as you mess up,
mhm,
as soon as you relapse, you lose everything, not just not just access to a program, but you lose your housing and you lose everything. It becomes easier to stay on the streets or easier to continue in whatever you're doing. And we're
mhm,
not even going to talk about drug testing at jobs. It becomes easier to
mhm.
hide and to lie
Yeah.
than it is to actually be honest about what's going on and why.
Mhm,
Because I strongly believe the number, as somebody who just was diagnosed with ADHD this year,
mhm,
knowing that one of the main medications for ADHD is in the same chemical family as methamphetamines.
That's right.
mhm.
It's like,
Yeah.
how many of us undiagnosed folks are turning to street drugs to deal with something that, because of the racist and problematic ways that ADHD diagnosis is even work, how many people are turning to these things just so they can function in a
Mhm.
system that, again, doesn't even see them as being dysfunctioned or disabled or harmed. So I'm done with my soapbox for the moment.
No, that's important though, and I think it's important that we, because we don't think about the fact that many people, well, the coping part of it can be tied to certain diagnoses such as ADHD, right,
Mhm,
depression, whatever the case may be. And then, the drug you may be using or that you cope with may also be exacerbating whatever symptoms you are
Exactly.
dealing with. For example, I was literally having this conversation with someone recently about, marijuana, and they use marijuana to cope with their ADHD. And
Mhm.
so we're talking, and I'm like, well, yeah, you should probably definitely avoid sativas because sativas are generally known to increase anxiety
mhm,
and that sort of thing, right? And he's like, what's a sativa? Right? But he's a marijuana smoker.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you know what I mean? But doesn't necessarily know what he buys. Basically, street weed. So you kind of, when you buy street weed, you get whatever you're gonna get. And it could be an indica, it could be a hybrid, it could be a sativa, it could
Right.
completely send you, you know,
And you don't know how
zoning.
much you're getting either half the time,
That's right. You don't know what the
especially if you
what
do edibles, just saying.
especially if you do edibles. Yeah. So it's I think there's room and space for education on a number of levels. Again, harm reduction. We're so used to brushing substance users off and just don't do it, just say no, that kind of thing. But providing education and really sort of embracing or engaging with empathy can
Mhm.
go a long way.
Yeah.
And I think that part right there, Keith, when you talk about that engaging with empathy, is so very important. Because one of the things that came up for me as Dale was sharing about sort of like some of the root of this, when we talk about the structural racism, when we talk about the lack of access to resource, we also need to be talking about the response, right? The community response once those details come up, right? That I'm using a substance, that I'm whether that is self-medication, whether that is um, I just enjoy it, right? It's recreational, right? But the response that we have an opportunity to share in an empathetic response doesn't always
Mhm.
come up, and it doesn't always come up from those closest to us, right? Those who we are in community with, and we may need that from, right? That
Mhm.
conversation that you just had with this person,
Mhm.
right?
Right?
Hey, I'm hearing what you're saying. It's really important, but have you thought about using in this different way, right?
Mhm.
A strand, a strain that doesn't activate anxieties, and that
Mhm.
was a brand new conversation for them, right?
Absolutely. And I'm sorry, the person, Darren, you mentioned ADHD, so it threw me off a little bit.
Oh,
The
yeah, no.
diagnosis the person was dealing with was anxiety.
Right.
So the sativa would not be good. Sativas might actually help with ADHD, but
Yeah.
anxiety is a whole other thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
And
I can
that's
also jump.
go
Oh,
ahead, go for it.
yeah, yeah. And just on the topic of, diagnosis, Darren, you mentioned that, ADHD definitely gets thrown out there. I also want to say bipolar disorder. That is something
Mhm.
that is wildly overdiagnosed, particularly in the Black community. When oftentimes, like the depression and symptoms of mania, could be the result of common stressors, everyday stressors, could also even be like generational
Mhm.
trauma or, trouble within the community, intimate partner violence, sort of any domestic violence, or just the day to day of living on this freaking planet, right?
Right.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah, and oftentimes when either they're misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed, sometimes the only thing that they can, some people think to do is to self-medicate, right?
Mhm.
Um, Likely because there probably has not been enough access to, quality medical providers, or maybe they are overextended, right? When if you call a place and the next time you can see your psychiatrist or a doctor is in 3 months, well, what are you going to do?
That part.
What are you going to do about that?
That part.
So.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And can we also talk about that, right? Can we also talk about the organizational level, right? We talk about the policy level, we talk about the individual level and the community level. But when someone is seeking out these services and showing up to the primary care provider, what are we
Mhm.
doing for that community of folks, right?
Mhm.
To make certain that their empathy is increased,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
they're able to receive and not immediately turn away or not immediately go back to that, oh, just say no,
Right.
right, response,
Mhm.
or immediately I'm going to refer you to an abstinence-based program,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
What are we doing for the education of those folks who are actually
Mhm.
seeing this show up through their doorsteps, presenting to them in their sessions, right? And creating more room for them to
Mhm.
have empathy and for them to start with where that
Yeah.
person is and what
Mhm.
they're naming feels
Right.
healthy and good
Mhm.
for them.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And we
And that
should be
starts with
clear.
One of
Go ahead,
y'all.
Dale.
yeah, it'll be real quick. And that's where it starts with proper trauma informed care, right?
Yes.
And and that is something that is certainly a big topic in a lot of organizations, like to be trauma informed care. What is that? Um, and it's something that I've also done a lot of trainings on, like what it means to be trauma informed, and to have an organization that is trauma informed. It's everything that we've been saying about, certainly starting with the clients at, right? And it's also recognizing the effects of trauma, right? And responding to it in an effective way, and also resisting the urge to re-traumatize, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, um, being trauma informed even in our referral process, right? So knowing exactly who we are referring our clients or participants to, knowing that they do fit the criteria, right? So that way, the person, you're not sending referrals of a person to an agency and they don't even fit the criteria. And what is that going to say about you? What is that going to say about your agency? What is that going to say about the field of social service in general? Right?
Right.
That adds to the re-traumatization. That adds to the mistrust. And in addition to meeting a person where it's also very important that we, as service providers, believe in a person's abilities to grow, right? That we have to believe in their capabilities to succeed, right? So also, even from, and this is me as a clinician talking, like a solution focused brief therapy lens, right? Highlighting exceptions to when the problem that they are coming into the space with has been less intense, and what are they doing to contribute to the success of in those time periods, right? We have to believe that all of the people that we touch have the capabilities to succeed. When we don't believe that, then the clients or the participants, they're going to see that, right?
Right.
That's right.
And they look to us as role models, whether we want to believe it or not, right? And so it's important that we understand what it means to be trauma informed, right? And that's not just on a individual level, that's on a policy level, that is on a administrative level,
Right.
that is in a community level, that is in our linkages, right? It's in language. Language is so important when it comes to trauma informed, right?
Right.
And we have to we have to believe that the person is the expert in their lives, right? And we may have some expertise, but they are the expert in their own lives. They have done enough to get to where they are today, even if they are focused on the problem. Something that they've tapped into, some strength they've tapped into to get to where they are today. And it's important for us to allow them to see that, to have them see that, right? Because sometimes our minds have a negativity bias, and we've been conditioned to think about what is wrong with us, what is bad with us, right?
Mhm.
That it really suppresses our positive qualities, our capabilities, right? And so it's finding that balance, right? And that, and
Right.
that balance is very important in the work we do on all levels, clinical or policy.
Truly. We're almost at the end of our hour. I know we in preparing for today's episode wanted to share a few resources, a few ways that people can learn about how to get help that is trauma informed, how to be cared for, how to care for someone, maybe a loved one, a family member, a friend, that is somewhere in this mix. Um, well, I've already shared in the chat a link to the Chicago Department of Public Health, and they do offer kind of a. I didn't realize just how much is on their website. Everything from Narcan kits, which basically, if someone's overdosing, you can you can get training on how to administer this that can immediately halt their overdose and
Mhm.
effectively save their lives. To fentanyl testing strips, which would allow you to test whatever substance if you are using a substance, whether it's meth or anything else. You can take a very small amount of it, test the substance, and find out if there's any fentanyl in that substance. And this is so important because uh, like when I heard the comparison to how powerful it is, somebody said, uh, oh, I can't think of the name of it, but the um, fentanyl,
Morphine.
morphine. Thank you.
Hmm.
They said more, like most of us have heard of morphine and know that's like powerful stuff. But to know that there are versions or formulations of fentanyl that are 50, 100 times more powerful, and there's one in particular out there right now in the streets of Chicago that is 10,000 times more powerful than morphine. Like I don't have to be a scientist. I don't have to be good with math to know that 10,000 times more powerful than what I thought I was ingesting is a lot. And it's so important that there are laws that we have in place in Chicago and Illinois that if you are calling 911 and substances are have been involved, you have there's um oh, somebody help me with my words. There's protections for you calling 911 so that uh rather than you not calling for help, if you were involved or the person involved, they're not going to be prosecuted for getting help. They're not going to be prosecuted for the drug that they were used. And we need to know this. Like you may not be in a situation for yourself, but you never know when you'll happen upon somebody and need to know, how do I help them? How do I respond in an emergency? So knowing that you can call 911, knowing that first responders, paramedics are your friends, you can tell them exactly what you've had or what your friend has had. They are there to help you. They are not there to judge you. Yes, there are medical providers who are not careful, but typically the paramedics and first responders are much more caring and much more concerned, and they're there to help people,
Hmm.
not to judge them, not to shame them. In the midst of their emergency situation. So please don't hesitate to call for help.
Hmm.
Does anything else come to mind for you guys? And I also want to mention one of our sponsor organizations at the end too. But go ahead.
Yeah, there are a
I,
couple of things that I can think of as we had this heavy topic come up, and I reached out to some folks that I just know in community. So the first one is Chicago Recovery Alliance. They are out on the streets. They are in communities doing outreach. They have drug testing strips. I'll make certain that we get a link dropped. Um, they have testing strips, fentanyl testing, other substance testing strips, to be able to break down what is in the substance that someone might be just ingesting. Um, and the other folks that I know are doing some brilliant street work with youth. Street Youth Rise Up are also doing a very similar thing as a part of their outreach. They go out into community and have access to recovery tools, or testing tools, right? So all of that. Those are two organizations that I'll make certain that we get the link to, drop it in the link up page. But just wanted to acknowledge those brilliant folks doing wonderful work in our communities, um, along the lines of harm reduction. So wanted to bring those in.
Awesome.
yeah. I don't know if I have anything to add, but I would strongly encourage folks to take advantage of the free fentanyl testing strips that are available through the health department, Chicago Recovery Alliance, a number of organizations affiliated with LinkUp Chicago were a part of a training a couple of weeks ago. So, we've been trained on how to use them, how to teach folks to use them, how we can distribute them, we can get you access to them. So feel free to reach out. They are, they're not perfect. They're not the end all. They have limitations for sure, but they can certainly help. Right? If you are someone who on the weekends decides or whenever decide that you're going to indulge, it could be incredibly helpful to have the strips handy to be able to test a small amount of the supply that you have to ensure that um, it won't take you out. The other thing I was going to say was that we talk a lot about harm reduction, and we are oftentimes very critical of sort of abstinence only programming. But for some people, abstinence only is the way to go. And so we're not anti abstinence programs for sure. I just want to make sure that we
Right.
were clear about that. We just want to, we want to be, inclusive of those programs and those people for whom that may not necessarily work for.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So, so it's like a yes and.
Right.
That's
That
right.
part, Dale.
That's right. That's right. It's not black and white, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then also just want to mention, and I'll drop the telephone number for them. Project Vita. They are an organization that is part of putting together LinkUp Chicago and a resource in the Little Village area. They can help you get connected to all kinds of care, whether that's STI testing, rental assistance, and testing strips will be available there as well. We are working with the people who are in our communities. This is for us and by us. This is what it means to be a community. It's not just showing up on an app. It's not just showing up to the latest party. I mean, I'm gonna be at IML. Come see me, say hi, give me a hug. But it is so much more about how we take care of each other, how we make space for each other, how we care for one another. Um, and we can do this, right? Like this, just like Dale was saying earlier. We have to believe that we as a community can be better than we are. We have to believe that this is possible, that this is real, that what we do when we show up for one another, that it matters. um,
Absolutely.
and that's been my experience, that it's not that any one of us has to have all the answers, right? The four of us all work in different capacities, and we work in our strengths to do what we do. And we need each and every one of you out there to do what you can do. So no, you don't have to become the next say no to drugs campaign, but you can call and call your friend and ask how they're doing and actually listen to how they're doing. You can let people know, hey, if you want to just be sure whatever you're using is okay, here's how you can do that. These are the steps that we can do to be a community, to take care of one another. That's so much a part of our history. Like, we've been doing this since forever. Ballrooms came out of people caring for one another when they got kicked out of their homes. Pride parades came from LGBTQ people showing up and marching for those who have been killed in the Stonewall uprising. Like, we have this rich, long history of us showing up for each other. When the HIV/AIDS epidemic hit, and hospitals weren't even touching HIV positive gay men, it was lesbian women who showed up and took care of us and our ancestors. So we know how to do it, right? We can do it. We just have to choose that we are going to be the solution that we're looking for. We have to choose that we're going to look out for one another and not let anyone else slip through the cracks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, with that being said, any last words, shout outs, or things that you're looking forward to? Like I said, I'm looking forward to IML. We're actually gonna have a few of us on for a live and in person recording of this show. We're gonna try to live stream it too, but I'm not promising that. But whatever the case, we got good stuff coming.
Yeah.
Anything you guys got that you want to shout out?
Well, I wish I was in town for IML to join you all, but I will be across the pond. So looking forward to that.
Nice. Enjoy your trip.
Where you going, Dale?
So I'm going to Barcelona for 3 days, and then
Nice.
getting on a 7 night cruise that also hits another port in Spain, and then Marseille, France, and then 3 stops in Italy, Florence, Rome, and Naples.
Very nice.
It's the humble
So
Safe
flex
travel.
for me.
That
Yeah,
part. That
Oh, I'm
part
just,
coming right
you
up.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a
Boy,
quick little jaunt,
Just click, click,
just
yeah,
a little.
just a little skip over the pond. That's it. So,
We love it.
I love
Listen, I'm gonna enjoy seeing all of y'all at IML. Dale, I want you to travel safely. Enjoy
it.
yourself.
I will. I
Um,
will. And you all be very safe and lovely and black as you are. All the
Black,
black.
black, blackity, black, black.
Black, black,
Black
blackity,
is
black, black, black.
black.
on the
If
black
you're
man's
looking
tide.
if you're looking to increase your movement, physical wellness, activity, CBGMC, the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus, is launching an 8-week intensive, immersive fitness program. I saw Paulo Colby in the chat. Shout out to Paulo. He's leading that. It's going to be awesome. It starts next week, next Wednesday. So you can check out our social media for more info coming soon on that.
Awesome. Awesome. That's what's up. Um, yes, yes. I'm gonna put one of Paulo's comments on the screen from earlier today. But yeah, we have people who care, right? Like
Absolutely. And
we have
Paulo is
people.
definitely a person who I'm enjoying working with him, and his spirit is something that we need to figure out how to clone in our community because it's just so it energizes me, and I appreciate that.
That's what's up. We love
Yeah.
to see it. All right.
All right.
As the old folks say, if all hearts and minds are clear, we will be back. We'll continue to do this on the fourth Tuesday of the month. So you can be sure to join us on June 28th. We'll be here, same time, same place. Hopefully, you're looking at this on either YouTube, on Facebook at LinkUp Chicago, or on the Project Vita page. But yeah, let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know what questions you have. Thanks to those who did show up in the chat. This was a lot more like condensed episode, so we didn't have as much of the on-screen comments. But yes, we'll be back next month for Pride Month and have a whole great episode lined up for you. And yeah, we are looking to see you soon. If you haven't done so already, also please follow Link Up Chicago. That's Link Up Shy. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. um, Follow us, and that helps to make our work more visible to others. Every time you click follow, that's how the algorithms work. Every time you click like or click a heart, that also helps us. And share this video, let other people know. We've got lots of resources coming down very, very quickly in the pipelines. So thank you for joining us, thank you for being here, and good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night.
Much love.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.